Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
It's kind of funny when you think about it. We're always going on about the health benefits of cashews, right?
Yeah, the nuts themselves.
Yeah. But what about the rest of the plant?
Oh, interesting.
Cashew apple and the shell. Usually we just chuck those, right?
Right. Straight in the bin.
What if those parts actually hold the key to some, pretty big health wins, especially with all this stuff we hear these days about obesity and metabolic disorders and all that? Could the answers be right there in what we usually consider waste? Pretty wild thought, right?
Yeah, that's a really intriguing idea. We're always digging deeper, trying to find solutions to these health challenges. And it's particularly fascinating to think about how those solutions might be found in the most unexpected places, even in byproducts of foods we already love.
Exactly. And guess what? There's new research that's looking into just that. This is cool. Scientists have been studying the cashew apple pulp and the cashew shell, and get this, they're finding that these parts might actually affect how our bodies accumulate fat. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore this research and its implications. Primarily, we're pulling from a study published in Scientific Reports, a pretty reputable journal, and also drawing on some insights from a health news article from the University of Tsukuba that covered this research.
So we're bringing the latest science, breaking it down, and hopefully giving our listeners some real aha moments along the way.
Totally. We want to cut through the jargon and really highlight what these findings might mean for us and our health.
Making it clear and accessible, that's always the goal.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the study itself.
Yeah.
What were those researchers at the University of Tsukuba actually trying to figure out? What was the big question driving their work?
Well, they really wanted to get down to the nitty-gritty, to examine the direct effects of different parts of the cashew plant on fat cells.
Oh, interesting. So not just like, does eating cashews help you lose weight, but how are those different components actually working on the cells themselves?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yep.
they looked at three specific parts: the cashew nut kernel, the fleshy cashew apple pulp, and the hard outer shell.
Ah, so they separated each part and then looked at them individually. That's a good approach.
They did. Now, there had been some earlier research hinting that cashews and their byproducts might have some benefits for weight management.
I remember seeing some studies about that, yeah.
Yeah, but those studies didn't really pinpoint how those substances were directly interacting with the fat cells themselves, at the cellular level.
Right, that's where this new research comes in. It's like zooming in with a microscope to see the action up close.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So to do this, they used a classic model in research, a type of mouse fat cell called 3T3L1 adipocytes.
Mouse fat cells.
Huh.
Why those?
Well, these cells are commonly used in labs because they behave a lot like human fat cells. It's a controlled way to study the basic mechanisms of how fat cells work.
Makes sense. So they took these mouse fat cells and then, exposed them to different parts of the cashew plant?
Exactly. They prepared extracts from cashew kernels, which they sometimes refer to as CK in the paper.
DK, okay.
Dried cashew apples, which they labeled as DA.
DA.
And cashew shells, which they called SH.
So they've got their CK, their DA, and their SH.
Yes, and they used ethanol to create these liquid extracts from the cashew parts. It's interesting to note, actually, that the cashew kernels and shells they used came from Vietnam, while the cashew apples were sourced from Burkina Faso.
Oh, wow. So they had samples from different parts of the world. That's cool. So once they had these extracts, what did they actually do with them?
Well, they added different concentrations of each extract to the mouse fat cells and watched what happened over a period of 7 days. They were looking at several things very closely.
Okay, like what?
First, they had to ensure the extracts weren't simply harming or killing the fat cells. That's called cell viability.
Got it. So making sure they're working within a safe range, so to speak.
Exactly. They figured out the safe concentration levels for each extract.
Yeah.
For the kernel extract, it was up to 126 micrograms per milliliter.
Micrograms per milliliter.
Yes. For the apple extract, 677 micrograms per milliliter.
Okay, a higher concentration for that one.
And for the shell extract, up to 21.1 micrograms per milliliter.
Gotcha. So they're working with safe levels for each extract. What else were they observing?
Right. So once they established that, they measured how much fat was accumulating within the cells.
Makes sense. That's kind of the whole point, right?
Yeah.
To see how these cashew extracts affect fat storage.
Yes. They used a special staining technique called oil red O staining. Basically, it helps visualize the fat droplets inside the cells so they can be measured.
Ah, so they can actually see how much fat is building up.
Exactly. But they didn't stop there. They also delved into the genetic activity within the fat cells.
Interesting. So like looking at which genes are being switched on or off in response to these extracts.
That's right. They focus on genes and proteins that are crucial for fat cell development.
Okay, so they're looking at the molecular machinery that controls how fat cells form and function.
Precisely. They looked at specific transcription factors, which are like master switches that control gene expression.
Ah, the master switches.
Yeah. They investigated PPAR gamma, CEBP alpha, and SREBP1, which are super important in determining whether a cell becomes a fat cell or not.
It's like they're looking at the instruction manual for fat cell creation.
A great analogy. And they also studied genes involved in fat storage itself, like the ones that produce fat-making enzymes, such as FAS and FABP4.
FAS and FABP4, okay. They sound important.
They are. And they also looked at some functional markers in the cells. For instance, they measured levels of GLUT4, which is a protein that helps cells take in glucose.
GLUT4, that rings a bell. Isn't glucose kind of the fuel that fat cells use to grow?
Exactly. And they looked at adiponectin, which is a hormone involved in regulating our metabolism.
Ah, adiponectin, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yes, it plays a crucial role. Now, on top of all that, they also measured the total phenolic content and antioxidant activity of the 3 cashew extracts.
Phenolic content, that sounds familiar. Aren't those compounds linked to various health benefits in plants?
They are. And they're often associated with antioxidant activity, which means they can help protect our cells from damage.
So they're looking at the potential protective power of these cashew parts as well.
Right. And they found some interesting things here. They discovered that the shell extract, SH, had a much higher amount of these phenolic compounds compared to the others.
So the shell was packed with those beneficial phenolic compounds.
It was. And both the apple extract and the shell extract showed very strong antioxidant activity.
So the apple and the shell were like antioxidant powerhouses.
Exactly. So they did a really comprehensive analysis of these cashew extracts. Now, after all that measuring and observing, what did they actually find? What did each of these cashew parts do to the fat cells?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. Let's break it down one by one. What about the cashew kernel extract, CK? What did that do?
Well, the kernel extract, CK, didn't actually seem to directly affect whether a cell became a fat cell or how much fat it stored.
Oh, that's surprising. I would have thought the nut itself would have a more direct impact on fat.
Right. It's interesting. However, and this is really noteworthy, it did significantly increase the production of adiponectin. Remember that hormone we talked about?
Yeah, adiponectin, the one that's good for metabolism and insulin sensitivity.
Exactly. And that's a big deal because those are key factors in metabolic health.
So even though the kernel extract might not stop fat from forming or being stored, it could have some really positive metabolic effects through this adiponectin boost.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
It's highlighting a different kind of benefit that might be coming from the cashew kernel.
Fascinating. Okay, so what about the cashew apple extract, DA? What did they observe there?
Well, with the apple extract, they found that it actually reduced the amount of fat stored in fat cells that were already developed.
Oh, so it was like working on the existing fat cells, making them less fatty.
Yes, like it was helping to shrink the fat stores within those cells.
That's interesting. Anything else?
They also observed that the apple extract slightly inhibited the activity of those master switch proteins, the PPAR gamma, CEBP alpha, and SREBP1, that are involved in the early stages of fat cell development.
Right. Those are the ones that determine whether a cell becomes a fat cell in the first place.
Exactly. So it's possible that the apple extract might have a dual action. It might reduce fat storage in existing fat cells, and it might also slightly slow down the formation of new fat cells.
Okay, so the apple extract seems to have some promising effects on fat accumulation. Now, what about the cashew shell extract, SH? Remember, we talked about how that one was packed with phenolic compounds and had strong antioxidant activity.
Yes, the shell extract was definitely a standout in that regard. And you know what? It also had a very noticeable effect on the fat cells.
Okay, spill the beans. What did it do?
The shell extract showed a very strong ability to inhibit the development of new fat cells.
Wow, so it was really putting the brakes on fat cell formation.
It was. It significantly reduced the activity of those key master switch proteins, PPAR gamma, CEBP alpha, and SREBP1, and as a consequence, it led to a decrease in overall fat accumulation in the cells.
So it was like disrupting the whole process of fat cell creation.
Pretty much. It also lowered the activity of genes involved in fat storage itself, like FASN and FAB4.
Right, those are the ones that we talked about earlier, the fat-making enzymes.
And it even reduced the levels of the glucose transporter, GLUT4.
So it was interfering with the fat cell's ability to take in glucose, essentially cutting off their fuel supply.
That's a good way to put it. Now, this is interesting. Unlike the kernel extract, the shell extract actually resulted in very low levels of adiponectin.
Oh, that's a bit unexpected, isn't it? Since the kernel extract boosted adiponectin.
It is. The researchers didn't delve into the reasons for this difference in the study, but it definitely raises some questions for future research.
Yeah, it's like each part of the cashew plant is playing a different role with different effects on those cellular processes.
Absolutely. It's like they're part of a complex orchestra, each instrument contributing to the overall symphony of how our bodies deal with fat.
That's a great analogy. So we've got these three parts of the cashew plant, the kernel, the apple, and the shell, each doing its own thing at the cellular level. What does all of this mean for us in the bigger picture? Why should we care about these findings?
Well, the most exciting implication here is the potential of these often discarded cashew byproducts, particularly the apple and the shell, to actually help us prevent or manage metabolic problems that are often linked to obesity.
Right, because obesity isn't just about excess weight, it's also about what's happening inside our bodies.
Exactly. We're talking about things like insulin resistance, where our bodies become less responsive to the hormone insulin, which can lead to a whole cascade of health problems.
Like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, all sorts of serious conditions.
Yes, and those problems are often rooted in unhealthy fat tissue.
So the idea that these cashew parts might help us combat those issues is really promising. And it's amazing to think that the solution could be found in something we usually just throw away.
Isn't it? It's like we've been overlooking a treasure trove of potential right under our noses.
Talk about a light bulb moment. So how are the pulp and the shell actually achieving these effects? What are the mechanisms at play?
It seems like they work through different pathways. The pulp, or the apple extract, appears to mainly reduce fat storage in existing fat cells. It's like it's telling those cells to hold on to less fat.
Okay, so kind of like shrinking those fat cells from the inside out.
Right. On the other hand, the shell extract seems to be better at preventing new fat cells from forming in the first place.
So it's like blocking the formation of those new fat cells, like putting up a no vacancy sign.
That's a great way to put it. It's essentially interfering with the signals that tell cells to become fat cells.
Interesting. And remember how the kernel extract increased adiponectin, that beneficial hormone?
Yes, and that might be a key part of how it contributes to healthier metabolic function.
So each part has its own unique mechanism, its own way of influencing those processes at the cellular level. But of course, with any new research, especially something this early on, there are always some things to consider.
Oh, absolutely. It's super important to be aware of the limitations of this study.
Exactly. It's not like we can rush out and start munching on cashew shells just yet.
Definitely not. So what are some of those limitations? Well, first and foremost, this study was done using mouse fat cells in a very controlled lab environment.
Right, those 3T3L1 adipocytes we talked about earlier.
Yep. And while those cells are a valuable model for understanding the basic biology of fat cells, it's really important to remember that a cell in a dish doesn't always behave exactly the same way as cells in a complex living organism.
Like a human being, for example.
Exactly. So while these findings are really exciting, we can't automatically assume that these same effects will happen in humans, or to the same degree. More research is definitely needed to see how these findings translate to real-world situations.
That makes sense. What else should we keep in mind?
Another important point is that this study looked specifically at extracts of these cashew parts that were made using ethanol.
Right, those CK, DA, and SH extracts.
Yes, and ethanol extraction is just one way of isolating certain compounds from these plant parts.
So eating the whole cashew apple or the whole shell, if that were even possible or appealing, might have different effects.
Exactly. It's not as simple as just chowing down on a bunch of cashew shells and expecting magical results.
Definitely not recommended. What else is important to consider?
Well, the researchers did note the high levels of phenolic compounds in the shell extract and the presence of vitamin C and carotenoids in the apple extract.
Right, those are the potentially beneficial compounds we talked about earlier.
Yes, and they think those might be contributing to the effects they observed. However, they didn't isolate and pinpoint the specific bioactive compounds that are directly responsible for these effects.
Okay, so there's still more work to be done to really understand which specific molecules are doing what and how they're interacting with the cells.
Exactly. It's like having a puzzle with some of the pieces still missing.
That makes sense. So it's a promising first step, but more research is needed to complete the picture. What did the scientists themselves have to say about their findings? What were their expert opinions or thoughts based on this work?
Well, regarding the cashew kernel extract and its effect on adiponectin, the researchers thought that this increase in adiponectin might actually have broader benefits beyond just fat cells.
Oh, interesting. So like a system-wide effect.
Possibly, they suggested it could positively influence energy use in other tissues like muscles and the liver, even though it didn't directly block fat cell development in their experiments.
So the kernel extract might be influencing how our whole body handles energy, not just focusing on fat cells.
That's what they're suggesting.
Pretty cool. What about the cashew apple extract? What were their thoughts on that?
They proposed that the reduction in fat accumulation they saw with the apple extract might be due, at least in part, to the presence of ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, and certain flavonoid compounds like quercetin.
Ascorbic acid and quercetin. Okay, I've heard those are good for you.
Right. And they've been linked to various health benefits in other studies, including some effects on fat cells.
Makes sense. So the apple extract might be working its magic through a combination of these beneficial compounds.
It's certainly a possibility.
Okay, and what about the cashew shell extract, the one that was really good at inhibiting fat cell development?
Well, the researchers noted that this strong inhibitory effect actually aligns with previous research on anacardic acid.
Anacardic acid, that's a new one.
It's a major component of cashew shell liquid, and it's been shown to have anti-obesity and insulin-sensitizing effects in other studies.
So this anacardic acid might be a key player in the shell extract's ability to block fat cell formation.
Exactly. And the researchers believe that extracts from the cashew shell, or maybe even specific compounds isolated from it, like anacardic acid, could be really valuable tools for developing new strategies to combat fat buildup and its associated metabolic problems.
Wow, so we're talking about potential new avenues for tackling a major health concern, all thanks to these often discarded parts of the cashew plant.
It's really a testament to the power of looking beyond the obvious, to exploring the potential of what we often consider waste.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of cashews, what's the takeaway message for our listeners? What should they be thinking about after hearing all of this?
Well, I think the key message here is that nature is full of surprises. We tend to focus on the obvious, the parts of plants that we eat, but there's so much more going on beneath the surface.
It's like we're just scratching the surface of what these plants can offer us.
Exactly. And this research is a great reminder that so-called waste products from our food sources might actually be hiding some really valuable compounds with significant biological effects.
It's like a whole new frontier of health and wellness is opening up right before our eyes.
And it challenges us to think differently about how we view and utilize the entire plant, not just the parts we traditionally consume.
Totally. It makes you wonder how many other plant-based byproducts are out there with hidden potential just waiting to be discovered.
Oh, I'm sure there are countless more. But it's important to remember that while this research on cashew byproducts is very promising, it's still early days. We need more research to confirm these effects in living organisms, not just cells in a dish, and to fully understand the mechanisms at play.
Right, it's always good to have a healthy dose of caution when interpreting early research findings. We don't want people rushing out to make drastic changes based on preliminary results.
Exactly. And we always advise listeners to consult with their healthcare providers before making any major changes to their diets or lifestyles based on research like this.
Solid advice. So to leave our listeners with a final thought, a little something to ponder, could the future of managing metabolic health involve a greater appreciation and utilization of the often wasted parts of our food sources? This research certainly opens up that possibility, and it's a pretty exciting one to consider.
It definitely is. It's a whole new way of thinking about food and its potential to support our health in ways we haven't even imagined yet.
Food for thought indeed. Thanks so much for joining us for this fascinating deep dive into the world of cashews and their hidden potential. We'll be back next time with another exciting exploration of the latest health and nutrition research. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay well.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.